I'm Dr. Roy Nadler, Dr. Kathy Greenberg, my esteemed co-host. We've been doing this show now for 20 years. She'll be with us. And today we're going to talk about the Octopus Organization. Nice metaphor about all the things that are going on in an organization in this kind of crazy world that we have now. So you've heard me over the years talking about that everything is more. So what does that mean? Whatever the emotion is, you probably have more of it, more stress, more pressure, more anxiety, more pain, more loneliness. And what do you do with all those emotions? We know now that emotional intelligence is lowered over the last years by about 5%. And we also know that people are really struggling. We've talked about VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. Our person we're going to interview today, Phil Le-Brun, wrote the book, The Octopus Organization. Most companies are built for a world that no longer exists. So this idea of VUCA, or you also heard us talk about BANI, brittle, anxious, nonlinear, incomprehensible. So all the things we kind of shake our head at. And the leader is in the position to try to make sense. The leader is the meaning maker. And how do you, as a leader or as a coach or as a parent, how do you manage yourself? How do you manage some of this chaos with others? And so one tool we'll want to lay in, and then we'll bring on Phil Le-Brun, is what do you do with these emotions? Well, you've heard us talk about this before. We have this acronym called NAME. So all this stuff is going on, and NAME, N stands for you have to notice it and give it a label. Notice it and name it. Just that, externalize it. I'm anxious. I'm thinking of all these things that could go wrong. Um, I'm obsessing. I'm ruminating. All right. So you have to name it. And then, like it or not, the A is accept it. How do you accept some of these emotions? It helps to understand it. It helps to maybe normalize it. As a psychologist in my past, a lot of what I did to help people is normalize what was going on for them. So you got the A to accept, but then the key is manage. You got to manage thoughts. You got to manage actions. We'll talk to Phil about, in an organizational sense, how do you manage thoughts? What are the actions that are going to help this chaos in an organization? And then the E is express. Now, do you just express it to yourself? Do you write it in a journal? Do you express it to your team? And if so, how do you express it? And that communication is so critical in the how to. So notice, accept, manage thoughts and actions, and express. All right. So let me introduce Phil Le-Brun. Phil Le-Brun is a former corporate VP and international CIO of McDonald's Corporation. We all know McDonald's. He co-led the consolidation and modernization of technology across 38,000 restaurants in 120 countries. Very impressive, Phil. He now leads the Amazon Web Services executives in residence team, former business and public sector leaders who mentor and guide Fortune 500 leaders on their journeys to create a more adaptable organization. So he's been there, he's done it. He's a sought after speaker. He's been featured in Harvard Business Review, Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, and this new book that we're going to talk about, he's the co-author of The Octopus Organization, a guide to thriving in a world of continuous transformation. And that's exactly what we're talking about. Phil, welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
And then just so we give you a co-author, I don't see it on here. What's your co-author's name?
Jana Werner, Dr. Jana Werner.
Okay, good, good. So we always kind of start off with this. I mean, given the chaos and kind of the theme about this, and I'm intrigued with you, the metaphor about the octopus, because all these people remember stories. People remember the metaphor. So I like to talk in visual terms or metaphors. But so kind of going back, who's been some of the key people that's kind of helped you be where you are today?
There's a long list. You could start obviously with my parents who encouraged my curiosity, my uncle who introduced me to my first computer at the age of 10, my chemistry teacher, who just had that way of teaching, which brought out the best in me. Um,
Yeah.
Even historic figures like Michael Faraday, who, as a Brit, I'd claim to be the father of electricity. You may disagree, but the idea that anyone with that curiosity can do anything if they
Yeah.
have that persistence and resilience.
That's beautiful. And that curiosity, I'm very curious, and I'm sure many of our folks are. And there's a difference, and we're going to be talking about leadership. Can, and I'm sure you're going to talk about this. Can they be curious what other people think? I think the default is let me tell you what I think. Right?
Yeah, I think we'll get there, but there are exceptions, thankfully.
All right. So both Kathy and I have written a bunch of books, and I'm always intrigued talking with other authors. So tell us about the book. When does it, is it out now? And then maybe kind of how did you decide to do this? And then also working with a co-author, Jana, maybe a little bit about the unpack that process.
Yeah, it came from a place of frustration for both of us. Jana's part of the executive and residence team too, similar
Oh,
background, leading transformations in logistics and financial service companies. And we talked to a lot of executives, and there was always this undertone of number one, we're different, we're going to make the same mistakes as everyone else. And secondly, that soul destroying feeling of we're going on another transformation. And whenever we ask executives who's gone through a transformation and has enjoyed it and has led to unbelievable outcomes, it's very rarely does a hand go up. So we've all endured these large scale soul destroying change programs. We've all made these mistakes. We've all seen these mistakes. We just wanted to come up with a better way. So Jana and I got talking about 3 years ago. Jana's got a strong academic background as well as a practitioner background. Her academic background's in complexity dynamics, and we
ah,
got talking. And yes, writing as co-authors, I wouldn't change that for the world. I wouldn't go back to writing by myself because I think that spark, you when
yeah.
you've genuinely got curiosity about how each other thinks and that psychological safety, that's where some of the magic happens.
Now, just because I've written or been co-author of, 8 different books, Kathy's been probably around, I think she's up to about 10 now.
Wow.
I'm going to just let her in. So how did you go about that? Like, did you each take a chapter? Did you send things back and forth? When I first wrote a book, my first one, was, in the late 70s, and it was everything on paper, back and forth, back and forth. And then Kathy's joining us, and Kathy, we're talking about Phil and how he's written his book with his co-author. You and I have done that, so we're delving a little bit deeper into that process. So how did you figure that out?
It was hard to start with because I'd started to write and the first 50 pages were this beautiful prose about lamplighters in London and Luddites and technology revolutions. That turned into, I think, about 2 sentences in the final book. So I think where Jana and I focused was really what's the mental model? How do we think about this problem? We had a lot of debates, lots and lots of whiteboard time.
Mm.
Um, Lots of glasses of wine where we came up with all of the anti-patterns. And then we bounced ideas off each other. We each took a chapter, we wrote it, we reviewed it between each other, we challenged each other. And the beautiful thing is, I think while we still suffer from a bit of post-traumatic stress syndrome, having gone through this, and how you've written so many books is beyond me. That spark of being able to bounce things off each other and us both coming at these problems with the right intent but different ideas, that's where the magic happens. So that's we ended up working with Professor Linda Hill and talking to her, and she talks about creative abrasion. That creative abrasion was actually really powerful.
I love that. Go ahead, Kat, jump in here.
No, I was just laughing, and as you're speaking, Phil, I'm reminiscing about, I'm currently on I think it's my 12th book, and I was just on the phone this morning with my writing team, which is split between London and Serbia. And today was the first day I gave them feedback on a
Hmm.
chapter that they're working on with me. And it just I try not to be traumatizing, and it's very hard when you know what you want and you're not getting the right voice and the right tone, and the stories are great, but they're not weaving them together, right? And then there's disparate ideas that are they're great, but the reader has to be able to follow your thoughts. So I'm sitting here freshly off of that call, but also reminiscing about writing with Relly, which was very easy. But tell us, I mean, I'm really thrilled that you're here, and reviewing again your amazing bio, right? Former VP, International CIO of McDonald's Corporation, and you've revamped what 120 countries worth of restaurants. I mean, you now lead the Amazon Web Services Executives and Residents team. When people come to you and they're asking you for advice, like on how to do A, B, or C, and you're talking now about writing a book, do you ever use this as an experience from which to give them advice, or like, where do you start?
I think we start from a place of empathy. I may be sitting down with a CEO or a CIO. I'm never going to sit there and say, if I was doing your job, because I don't do their job, even if I did one similar to them, it's a different environment, different context, different problems, different people, and the such like. So we all start from this point of empathy and understanding and curiosity. It's this really trying to understand what the problem is. And then, yeah, the reality is we could say, don't do this, don't do this, don't. And what we try and do is hold a bit of a mirror up and get them to think about what's their mental model when they're going into, say, a AI transformation. How are they thinking about it? What are the behaviors they're looking for? What's the outcome they're trying to drive? We don't even start with the technology. And that's always interesting, because what we find is one of the most powerful levers we can pull is just tweaking someone's mental model, getting them to think about a problem in a different way. And storytelling is amazingly powerful in doing that.
Oh, beautiful.
Phil, we didn't say this in the intro, but part of this, that I typically say, and Cass heard me say this all the time, us as coaches and leaders, it's really about slow thinking. And slow thinking, and you've already hit a couple of the EI competencies that we talk about. You talked about empathy, you talked about curiosity, and understanding. And all of those are really important. So part of this is that most of us, and going back to, we're going to talk about the octopus metaphor, and then you're going to tell us about what the Tin Man is, but we're on autopilot. And
Yeah.
so just sitting in front of someone like you or Kathy or me, someone, and you can almost hear them go, ah, good question. Because they're thinking. And we don't think. We've outsourced our thinking.
Time to think.
And with AI, we're not even going to have to think anymore. And so having this human contact with curiosity, with empathy, and letting people unfold. So the metaphor I like is, let's put your thoughts on the table. Oh, tell me about that. Tell me about this. Well, where is this going to go? And they can actually be strategic and creative.
Yeah, 100%. Because you ask simple questions like, or you make simple comments like, do you have functions like IT and operations and marketing? And do you have then 15 layers of management on top to tell the people you've hired to do a job how to do the job? And it's just, yeah, we do that. Why? And the reality is we do it because it's instinctual. Everyone else does it. It's a safe option. But then when you start to decompose where that came from, which was a different era with different problems, you can see the lights go off and say, oh, maybe there's a different way. And that's then triggers an executive's curiosity. Then the real challenge is, okay, how do you take them on the journey to something better?
And that's really where we're trying to go, right? We're not trying to make anybody wrong. We're not trying to put anybody in a position where they feel like their ideas aren't relevant or aren't even salient to whatever the question is at the moment. But in today's environment, and I'd love your position on this, because you came from this idea of, let's come from a point of empathy. It's very hard to give people feedback in today's environment. That psychological safety, that fear of doing some kind of damage to their well-being is so in the forefront of our minds. You're talking about an Octopus Organization and thriving in a world of continuous transformation. I'm really curious how you envision making that work for everybody at every level.
Yeah, I think you touched on an important point. The one on feedback, we often talk about feedback being like a corporate colonoscopy. It happens once a year, and you just want to forget about it. And because it's ridiculous that you go through this annual performance review where you get 12 months worth of feedback in a day, and it's highly filtered. And our belief is tied to the octopus metaphor, feedback should flow like water. But what I find one of the proudest things I take away from the book is Yana and I present a lot. And when we walk off stage, we immediately debrief. And I remember we did this in front of a colleague, and Yana was there and said, Phil, your start, no energy, you screwed up the story, blah, blah, blah. Then you picked it up. And our colleague was looking at us, what's going on? But the most important thing is she did that from a place of care and love. She did it because she knew I could do better, not to criticize. And that's so powerful because I had actionable information I could use immediately. Why don't we do that? And I think too often we as humans are uncomfortable giving feedback. We haven't thought it through properly. We're not even too sure what we're saying. And often what we're actually saying to an individual is, I wouldn't have done it that way. Here's what I would have done. As opposed to saying, how can I, Kathy, help you next time around? Because I know you're a brilliant person. If you weren't a brilliant person, you wouldn't be here.
All right, so she is a brilliant person, and you can see emotional brilliance. Not
It
only
says it in the
brilliant,
background.
well, yes, emotionally brilliant. And Kat came up with that name when we were writing our book, and it really it is a great little takeoff on emotional intelligence, and there's a lot of really good things. So that book, our little plug, you can get on Amazon, but there's also the audiobook. So tell us about kind of the two things, at least we have here, the octopus and the Tin Man. And I think going back to stories, and we're all presenters, people are going to remember a image, a story. And so how did those come about? And then maybe you can deconstruct them.
Well, the Tin Man we use, if you recall the Wizard of Oz, the Tin Man was rigid, clumsy, bit rusted, no heart, slow to react, forever needing someone there with an oil can. And that just reminded us of many organizations. But, the key to the Tin Man is it's mechanical. You can take an arm off and plug another arm in. And while no leader sets out to build an organization like that, the reality is many of our organizations we treat like they're complicated. You can just unplug the IT department and plug another IT department in, or plug AI in, and suddenly magic happens. And we find these organizations, it's not just that they're slow, but they run on permission to innovate, permission to speak up, permission even to care. And this idea of ownership dies because you have to survive a minefield of sign-offs. You don't get ownership. You get people effectively driving a rental car. When was the last time you washed a rental car? Never. But if you feel ownership, if it's your car, then it's different. And we found, you can't command creativity or mandate passion. And that's where the octopus came in. And actually, it was Yana's young daughter that gave us this fact out of the blue that 2/3 of an octopus's neurons are in its arms. So yes, it has a brain, but 2/3 of its thinking are actually in its arms, and they can work independently, but also in a highly cohesive way. And other fun facts: an octopus can play a piano. Probably not useful to your audience, but interesting. It grows up without its parents. It has to learn its way in the world, and it doesn't have a hard shell. It survives because it is curious. It learns, highly adaptable. It can even change its RNA as it goes from hot to cold water over a matter of hours. And
Wow.
the other later fact we discovered was it hasn't changed its physical structure for 250 million years. Now, compare that to an average organization who changes its structure every 2 to 3 years. And the irony is the very thing that organizations tend to do, which is change structure, is probably the least effective way of changing how an organization is successful.
I'm sitting here and I'm thinking so many thoughts at the moment about why I will never eat an octopus again.
Thank
But
you.
but but to the point you're making, there's also a comical response that I'm having because every once in a while we have a bedmate, whether it's a grandchild or a friend, and I say to people, sleeping with them is like an octopus trying to find its keys, because they're all over the place, right? And you're not really getting any rest.
Yeah.
But as we think about this guide that you're speaking to thriving in a world of continuous transformation, um, we're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, I would love for you to take us on the journey that you speak to help our audience really understand that element of aha that you got in addition to calling it, the Octopus Organization, that made you really feel the passion that you have around what you're doing now. So don't go away. Come right back. You're listening to Leadership Development News.
Come back to Leadership Development News, Profiles and Practice of Top Performers. We're talking with Phil Le-Brun, who's talking to us about his new book, The Octopus Organization, A Guide to Thriving in Continuous Transformation. You can get information on that on the octopusorganization.com, just as you imagine. Phil's email is plebrun, P for Phil, LEBRUN at amazon.co.uk. So Phil, before the break, Kathy was talking about kind of the journey, and I was saying, as a consumer, one of the things that, we talked about how many books we've all written. Supposedly people take a book, they look at the back cover, they look at it for about maybe 4 or 5 seconds, and then decide, should I even open it up? So to have people open up your book, what's in it? Maybe describe kind of the chapters. You describe how Yana and you took different ones. I know when Kat and I, we put together our whole outline first, and then you got the visual, and then say, okay, how do these pieces meet? So what's it like? Walk us through what's in there, what someone could describe or walk away with in that.
It was never intended to be a book you read cover to cover. You can, but it was more like choose your own adventure. Where we started was we looked across hundreds of customers we've dealt with. We interviewed many leaders, and we found there was about 300 dysfunctions of change. Often we apply old mindsets to old models and expect something new to come out. And we boiled those up into 36 what we call anti-patterns. And the start of the book really describes why organizational change doesn't work as it is today. This idea that I'm going to make the organization agile, I'll bring in consultants, 2 years later, I'm agile. It doesn't work. And even, let's say those rare occasions it does work, you stop changing at the end of that program and you start to go backwards. So the book's really chunked into 3 main themes: clarity, ownership, curiosity. And those 36 anti-patterns can be found under each of those. What we do in each anti-pattern is we set up a story. What do we often see in organizations? Why do we do some of these things? Like, why do we instinctively try and centralize things when you're a CEO coming into a multinational company? Well, we do it because we believe it's going to be more efficient. The problem is you've just created this massive bottleneck, and not every business unit is exactly the same. And then we describe what an Octopus organization does and why. And then very practically, we describe a set of levers, things you can try tomorrow or next week in your own organization at every level of the organization. And why that's important is we believe organizations are complex. You change the reward and recognition process, and it has a second, third, fourth, fifth order implication. So you change something, you see what else changes, you make another change. And there was this beautiful phrase a chief transformation officer came up with, which is, our desire was to light 1,000 fires, have 1,000 people come into your organization, take whatever resonates with them, an anti-pattern that resonates with them, and for each of them to try something in their seat. And just imagine the compound effect of so many employees who truly feel like they can make a difference. So clarity talks about everything from, are you clear about your mission, your strategy, your priorities, even down to your personal feedback?
Wow.
Ownership is about this idea of agency, responsibility plus authorship, this idea that I want to do more than a job description, I want to make a difference. And then curiosity, as it says on the tin, is this idea that we have more questions than answers today, and we should actually nurture this idea of questions being a good thing. And then we close the book with the, okay, what do you do next? And we talk about this idea of scaling. I'm sorry, spreading, not scaling. Too often we find this one solution in the corner of an organization, and then we mandate it across the entire organization, robbing everyone of their ownership, and also falsely believing that the entire organization is exactly the same and you can just scale something. So this idea of sharing lessons of what's worked, what hasn't worked, of what we call seductive adoption, this idea that if you've come up with a great idea and I hear about it and it solves one of my problems, then I should be pulling it rather than it being pushed on me. So, and it's a rinse and repeat. You should be able to pick up this book in a year's time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time, and still find some inspiration there about how to become a better version of your own organization.
You tapped into something where I 100% resonate with what you're saying, because currently I'm working on the 25th anniversary edition of Global Leadership Next Generation that I had written with Marshall Goldsmith back in 2002. And it's now called Global Leadership Future Proof. It comes out in January 2027. And the question I have for you, based on that, is I find myself explaining a lot of things that don't exist anymore. So help our audience understand, what is your definition of an anti-pattern? And can you give us a couple of case examples? Because I think examples speak so much more to people than the conceptual.
Yeah, absolutely. So an anti-pattern is a habit that feels like good leadership, but often quietly makes things worse. So we define them as conditioned, formulaic responses to a complex problem. So while they seem to, on a surface level, solve a problem, they actually make things worse. For instance, take strategy. We have a McDonald's test for strategy. If you took the company name off your strategy one pager, and it's always in PowerPoint, it's always got a roof with pillars, and you left it in a McDonald's and someone picked it up, would they actually know who your company was? Because often, that strategy will have things in it like, we're going to be a people-centric, people-first organization. We're going to become we aspire to be number one in the industry. Well, that's an aspiration. It's not a strategy. And we find good strategies. The antithesis of the anti-pattern is a good strategy focuses on durable needs. So if I took, for instance, Amazon.com, the e-commerce part of Amazon, I can't predict the future, but I'd be pretty certain in saying, as a customer, you don't want things delivered slower, you don't want less choice, and you won't want higher prices in the future. So they become good, durable needs. Another anti-pattern would be what we call the tyranny of and. The leaders who pride themselves on prioritizing everything. We're going to do this and this and this and this and this. And we find time and time again, if you talk to the front line of an organization, they have no idea what's important to the organization. Because we're trying to do everything. And we context switch constantly. And as human beings, we're not very good at that. So an anti-pattern would be not saying no to stuff. Yeah, some of the best organizations we've met have been very deliberate at saying, we're going to do these three things really, really well. And everything else, they can wait. Or we talked about feedback earlier on. I think I probably described the anti-pattern there, but this idea that we'll save feedback to the end of the year rather than using it in the moment. One final anti-pattern, one of my favorites, is we got it from Astro Teller, who's the CEO of the Alphabet Moonshot Labs. And he asks people the question, if you want to get a monkey to sit on a pedestal and recite Shakespeare, what would you do first? And the anti-pattern is most organizations would build the pedestal. Look, boss, I've made progress. I've got a pedestal. the monkey's never going to talk. What are you doing? And yet we're wired in organizations to show we're making progress. And we truly believe organizations need to think big about the future, because thinking small is a self-fulfilling prophecy. But go solve the hardest problem first. In this case, can you get the monkey to talk? Probably not. And if someone comes to you as a leader and says, the monkey's never going to talk, or I can't solve the hardest problem, celebrate success, because they've just saved you a lot of time and money, and you can move on to the next amazing thing to go solve.
So, Phil, I want to hear this definition again about the anti-pattern. So I got conditioned response to.
It's a conditioned formulaic response to complex problems.
Complex.
So let's centralize or let's decentralize. You have very simple solutions to what are actually very complex problems.
Right. And the other piece that is so interesting that you're saying, I was just listening to some information about this. Just, Kathy and I are well informed around neuroscience and how things go, and just the way the brain is, and it's really about the and. We want to add things. Oh, if we do this, and I think the brain just goes there. Oh, what about this? What about this? And it's always about adding things. And I don't think it's natural. And maybe you can speak to, how do you talk about what do we subtract? Or is, in the curiosity piece, do we even think about what do we subtract, or is it on autopilot, like we said earlier, and it's all about addition?
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Because we suffer from things like loss aversion. We don't want to let go of things.
Yeah.
As leaders, we want to declare everything's a priority, because if we don't do it now, when are we going to do it? At McDonald's, one of the things the CEO did was announce 3 priorities: 20,000 restaurants on e-commerce by the end of that year, 8,000 restaurants on delivery, thousands of restaurants with the experience reimagined. 3 things. And at the time, this was a company that took 10 years to make a decision. And, all of our response was, it's impossible. By the end of that year, we'd overachieved on those, and it set a foundation to reinvent McDonald's. We talked to a CEO of a German sports apparel company, Benedict Berman. He related it to his extreme mountaineering experiences, where most mountaineers carry lots of oxygen because they're going to trudge up to summit through the death zone, where oxygen can't sustain life. He says, I take the opposite approach. I cut my laces, I cut tags off my clothes, I even shave my hair and my eyebrows, and I carry no more than 7.4 kilos of equipment. I summit and ski back down in 2 days. And it was just like, Benedict, that's a great story, but how's it relevant? He said, that's my job as a CEO. It's to cut all of the stuff that is getting in the way of us overachieving on the things that really matter to our organization.
I'm thinking about a couple of things, and I don't know if you're familiar with this book, but many years ago, in the either late 1990s or early 2000s, there was this thought process around the disciplines of organization, and a book was written about the disciplines of organization, and they used McDonald's as a brilliant example of fast food. Every McDonald's was organized and orchestrated to get you in and out. Even the seats were hard plastic, so that you only stayed so long as the nerve endings on your bottom could effectively
I've heard that one
sit
before.
in a hard plastic chair. But it was a beautiful example of making an experience practical, functional, but tasty, due to the consistency of the food, the quality of the food. And that McDonald's was one of the few organizations in that, quote, fast food industry that was able to achieve mass production but consistent quality, and be able to, if you will, attune it to the cultures in which it was distributed. Because what is tasty in Bombay wasn't necessarily considered tasty in London, right? And so recognizing sweetness of the drink brands, sweetness of the ketchup brands, right? The amount of onions in the different recipes of the burgers themselves. So, McDonald's was always a leader in one discipline or another, and I think it speaks to the strength of what you were just describing, which is a leader standing up and saying, these are the three things we're going to be good at, and these are the things we're going to strive to. So my question there is, do you believe that organizations can truly share leadership in an organization, distributed as it might be, as you say, following that octopus philosophy?
100%, especially in many organizations which are centered on knowledge work. You hire these brilliant people. You hire them because they know their stuff. They're passionate. They've learned how to get things done. And then we try and micromanage them. It makes no sense. Stanley McChrystal, General Stanley McChrystal, talked about this in Team of Teams, where he had to invert how he looked at special operations. They were sucking all of the information into a central command, making decisions, and then passing it back to the front line. It was too slow. The people who knew what the conditions on the ground were the people who were on the ground, and they were on the ground because they were experts in what they were doing. Even arguably, if you look at a company like McDonald's, there's a lot of standardization. You really don't want, when you're feeding 1% of the world's population every day, you really don't want every time someone's cooking fries for them to say, I wonder if there's a different way of doing it today. There's that consistency that's important, but it's also octopus-like. 40,000 restaurants can't go back to the center headquarters in Chicago and ask for permission every time. So they're having to deal with their realities on the ground all the time. So I think yes, leadership has to be shared. Otherwise, this idea of the brilliant leader at the top of the organization who makes all the decisions, you've just found your bottleneck there.
Right.
Especially now where AI is driving the cost of execution close to zero. What's holding organizations back is the fact it still takes 6 months to sign off something I could have built in 5 minutes.
I have a follow-up question there, Relly, and just forgive me for being so greedy here with Phil's time. But, so that's my area of expertise, Phil, is I work across special operations and special forces, and that is my community. The thing that makes it different, and so I have a follow-up question, the thing that makes it different for special operations, and they are the only elite forces across the Department of Defense, whether it's MARSOC, the SEAL teams, we call SEAL Team 6 now Development Group, CAG, which is Delta. Those organizations and those elite teams, which are only 2% of their population, are the only individuals that are allowed to make those decisions independent of a centralized function. And it's because of the training that they have gone through in order to be able to make that decision. I'll give you an example. In the movie, if you've seen Captain Phillips, there is a scene where the sniper is going to take a shot to save our hero's life, okay, played by Tom Hanks. And you see a very suspenseful moment in which a green light occurs, and they need 3 green lights in order to make the shot. And we only have 2 green lights, but the person who's the sniper has to make the decision, can they make the shot? There's nobody in that circle going back to that sniper saying, now's when you take the shot, because they're not on the ground. They don't have the focus, and they certainly don't have the talent to execute that task. So my question to you is, if, as you beautifully articulated, everybody at McDonald's on the ground as a leader has to be able to make that decision, do you believe inherently that you can create that shared leadership experience, and is training alone enough to support that kind of execution?
What a great question. Firstly, yes, we do believe that, but I think it takes a focus of leadership in areas which typically they haven't focused on. If you ask most employees what their company's purpose is, their purpose statement, most folks won't know. Most purpose statements read like something Dilbert wrote. We're going to be a platform-based, AI-enabled organization that leverages our customer synergies to deliver outstanding customer outcomes. And it's just like, what does that even mean? It's meaningless. Most leadership principles in organizations aren't known. They're normally website decorations. If they are known, they're often something like, we will act with integrity. It's just like, I hope so. That's sort of given, isn't it? They're meaningless. The priorities aren't known. So what we find organizations that really share leadership do well is they focus on these things. Amazon's mission statement to be Earth's most customer-centric company. You think, okay, that's pretty basic, but that's why my job exists, for instance. I can relate directly what I do in my day job to that mission statement. Leadership principles are used to recruit. They're used to promote people. They're even used in everyday language. And why this is important is they become guardrails. It's about leading out of line of sight. So I know what great looks like because I know what the leadership principles are. I know what our company stands for. I know what the key objectives are. And I have a lot of freedom there because I understand the why and in many cases the what. I get to decide a lot of the how. And that's where, I have this awesome role where I have a lot of agency. So leadership can be shared. I don't believe it's just training. Training, I think, has become diluted. We send a person on a 1 week course, they come back and we expect them to change. And often we don't even allow them to practice in their job what they're learning. I think a lot of this is about leadership role modeling. It's about leadership as leaders as coaches. It's about, for instance, Andy Jassy in Amazon has recorded videos on every single leadership principle. We have 16 about what it means to him, how he uses them. But he's sending a message in doing this, which is these things are important. We bake it, we have unique ways of recruiting, which really make sure we protect those leadership principles. It's not unique to Amazon. We see this in every organization that does a great job here. They set guardrails, not gatekeepers. I don't have to get 50 committees to sign off, which robs me of my agency and desire to innovate. But there's guardrails, often automated. So just like a train wheel that isn't glued to the track, but it has these flanges on to make sure at high speed it stays on the track. Guardrails do the same. It enables an organization to move at speed safely.
Gorgeous, gorgeous.
So that was really good. So we're going to hit on a couple questions. We're going to zoom back out. I really want to hear what you think about change, because everything that the three of us do and that we've done and people listen to us, it's all about change. And so, the whole idea of how do you really make change work? I know you hit on some of the key things. And then any kind of key mistakes and maybe takeaways. We're going to our last segment. You're listening to Leadership Development News. Come right back. Go ahead, Ken.
Welcome back. No, hold on. I know that's my cue. I was just thinking to myself, how do I want to position this last beautiful segment here? Because I'm going to be really sad when this show is over today. And I can't say that very often. But I think that when we have somebody like Phil on the show who's got so much experience and so much good intention and best practice, can we talk a little bit about this thing that you said about biggest mistakes that leaders make when they're trying to do something that's actually good, which is so much a part of what we need to do as leaders, which is take people to a place some of us haven't been before, and it can be very uncomfortable. So how do we help people transform better with less mistakes?
Yeah, we read a research report a few years ago that said 50% of transformations fail at step number one, which is leadership. And I think some of the anti-patterns we see there are treating change as a one-time project. We run the organization, then we transform, then we run the organization. Every time you stop transforming, you go backwards. Most of the literature we see on transformations themselves say productivity dips because at least 70% of your organization has one question: do I have a job? It's about hunkering down. It's not about believing that this is going to be an incredible opportunity for the organization and them. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we're always surprised about how misaligned leadership teams are around transformation. And we've done this with some of the world's largest companies. We've had the leadership team who are part of the way through the transformation, each of them write down, what does success look like? How do they measure it? Who's accountable? And it's amazing. We have this N-2 theory, which is the number of leaders in the room minus two. That's the number of answers you get, because someone will say, the CEO will say, we're going to become an AI-enabled organization. And everyone sits there and says, yep, sounds good. They go back to their functions, they decide what it means for their functions. And you end up generating this internal competition because everyone's goals are different. And all it takes is a single leader to say, hey, boss, sounds good. What does it mean? How do we know we're successful? Who's accountable? What are we going to stop? How do we measure success? And having some of those critical conversations up front, and then being laser focused on what makes you different as an organization. Finally, as a leader, we took some inspiration from Indra Nooyi, the former CEO and chairperson of PepsiCo. And she said she looks for two things in leaders: the ability to storytell, because us humans, that's what we listen to. We want to know our part in the story. And then secondly, curiosity. Leaders who understand that they may have this aspiration, but they really don't know how to get there. And their job is to enable others to help them on that journey to become a better version of themselves by asking questions more than giving answers.
So how do you coach people on the team, not the CEO, to challenge and to do that? Because the path of least resistance is to nod their head like you're doing now, and then you have the meeting after the meeting. I didn't agree with that. I don't know where we're going. So how do you get the meeting after the meeting into the primary meeting, and what should a leader do to bring up those questions?
Yeah, I hate those meetings before the meetings and all of the things that go on before that. I mean, firstly, we say, look, leadership is what you do. It's not a title. It's not a role. It's not because you're a vice president. Anyone can lead at any level of the organization. It's how you show up. And I think the easiest way I find is with genuine curiosity. It's not to say, hey, boss, you're wrong, because
Right.
that's going to provoke a natural reaction. It's to say with genuine curiosity, I hear what you say. Can you help me understand? Can you give me an example? And just ask open-ended questions. And you could say this is almost coaching, but I think of this as I simply just want to understand better what's in your mind, because if I understand what you're saying, I can do a better job. If I don't, we're going to be at loggerheads. And we take some inspiration from Professor Linda Hill, who we mentioned earlier, which is actually that cognitive conflict, that creative abrasion. That's where brilliant leadership teams excel. It's not harmony. It's the fact that we're going to argue passionately, not because I think you as a human being are wrong, but we're passionate about the mission we're on. And we have our opinions, and we're arguing because we want to come together and we want to have the best ideas. Every time I've been in one of those teams, we've always come away with a better solution that none of us thought about. So I don't see that conflict as a bad thing. I see it as actually part of the imagination process, which, you both said it earlier on. With AI, we are at risk of losing that. We plug in a prompt to a large language model, we get the answer. I don't need to talk to anyone, except everyone's getting the same answer. And one study says 60% of people aren't even getting the questioning the answer they get. That's a race to the middle. It's not going to be a race to the exceptional.
You brought up something that's really important here, and that is how we can use information at the individual level more effectively. And so I'm at the National Command and Staff College, and we have a new product called Magnus One. It's been out now for a few years across public safety organizations and special operations. And it saves lives because we have officers who get in their patrol cars every day and they get a check-in. One is a me question, one is a we question, one is a question, who do you want to celebrate, meaning who supported you, and the other last question is who is creating challenges that make it more difficult for you to do the right thing, which tells us either the culture or a human being, right, is at the root of that. And so it alleviates a lot of stress and burnout and struggle for individuals who are already in high risk consequence jobs. And I can imagine as we roll this out to more corporate environments that what a person is struggling with inside of a corporate organization or an industry is going to be similar in the sense that they actually believe that everything they do every day is a human risk factor, when in fact it's truly not. Their lives aren't going to end if they make a mistake, whereas in the areas and the people within the organizations where I work, it will be. So as somebody who's looking at making things better, do you believe that these well-being platforms, which also integrate policy and adapt, to the needs of the community, are a real essential part of the future of an Octopus organization? Because I believe they are. I've seen it saved so many lives in the industry where I work. And I'm curious why more corporate organizations aren't adapting to and going out and looking for these wellness applications.
I think the reason I've seen too many of these initiatives that are all about deployment. We're going to deploy a platform and everyone's going to use it. None of us like to have things rolled out on us. We actually want to feel like we're part of the program. We understand the why it's being done. We have leaders, and not leaders at the senior levels of the organization, but the folks, my direct boss, his or her boss's boss, who actually embrace this and truly believe it. It's not just a checkbox exercise. We see this with AI, the number of people using AI today. Does it matter? It's not a good metric. If you measure me on something like, have I used AI or have I used a platform, then I'm going to use it, but I haven't internalized it. I do think these are important questions, because what is going to make us successful as organizations is being more human, offloading a lot of the drudgery, the bureaucracy, these processes we've created for process sake, getting rid of them or offloading them to technology. And then where's our competitive advantage? It's us being more human and being more empathetic, walking in the shoes of customers, having that creative abrasion, creating psychologically safe environments, being able to give feedback. All of that is actually quite stressful. So yes, I do believe we need to invest in the human well-being. And we've seen Astro Teller at Alphabet X Moonshot Labs. He has coaches for his top 200 leaders. How brilliant is that? And it's not just because he wants to focus on the professional persona. As he says, we all bring our baggage to work from our childhoods and previous jobs and the such like. So I think this is critical, but you have to truly believe in it as an organization rather than treat it as another tool or program to be rolled out.
Absolutely. And I know as we come to the close here, Relly, I'm going to hand over to you, but I just want everybody who's listening today to hear this. Coaches are more instrumental in the future of what we believe to be any organization, Octopus or not, because it's getting our thoughts outside of our heads.
Right.
Those boxes of stuff that we don't know until we can hear it outside of our head. And a good coach helps us get there. And I'll volunteer to help anybody who wants to do that kind of work to get to the level that you're talking to, Phil, because that's where the meat of change and success in organizations really is. Been an amazing show today. Thank you.
And to kind of echo, Kat, what you're saying, and then we'll end with our lightning round for Phil. You've heard me say this, and I think with AI, we've outsourced our thinking. And a lot of what you're saying, Phil, is with the empathy, with the curious, we got to think. And we don't like to think long, and we don't like to think hard. And so I think your book is provocative. Hope people pick that up. But that curiosity, and it also goes back to the question I had before, the emotional intelligence that Kat and I promote so much. How am I going to challenge my leader? Yes, you're going to challenge them, but you really need to do it in a way that immediately doesn't strike them being defensive, which is what will happen. So with this, one of the questions we have in our lightning round, Phil, is you just fill in the blank. Leadership is
someone who shows up with no formal power, who wants to guide, solve, coach folks, who people follow because of trust.
beautiful. All right. And then the second one is at work, it's all about
Oh, that's a hard one. It's all about learning. The more we learn, the faster we learn, the better we can be as human beings, as also as organizations.
All right, and then the last one, Kat was bringing it up about wellness, and we're all on autopilot. So during the workday, not after the workday, I know this is after your workday now, but what do you do during the day to best recharge?
Sometimes I go for a run and just get into my head. Other times I seek out people I trust in the organization and we'll debate something and get hugely excited about it and be curious. And that to me is fun. I recharge from feeding off the energy others bring to a problem.
Well, I think
Gorgeous.
you've
Yeah.
given us a lot of energy here today, which is great. I know I feel like Kat, I'm sure you feel it, but go ahead, Kat, you can bring us home.
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Phil. This has been a wonderful hour. I can't get enough of you. Obviously, I'm going to go run out, and my little fingertips are tapping already on Amazon to get the book. But I want to make sure that everybody knows that we're here every week to help you tune up your leadership on Leadership Development News. And a final note, my new mantra, there is no AI without EI. Till next time, take good care, everyone. And thanks again, Phil.
Thank you so much.